From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Corey. Really looking forward to being in South Australia with you next week. You're going to be in the Adelaide studio. We will be, of course, in Port Lincoln. If you would like to join us for our final Our Town of the Year, you can always send me an email, which is ourtown@skynews.com.au, ourtown@skynews.com.au. Happy Sunday night. Lots to get to. Bold predictions for the week ahead, but so much to talk about the weekend just gone. Now, we know that a week is a long time in politics, but a year, it can go like that. This time last year, the final comments on the first year of the Prime Ministership of Anthony Albanese was that he was heading high into the holidays. 12 months later, same poll, same people. Most voters now disapprove of Anthony Albanese's performance as the Prime Minister. Now, reality is things have been shaky for a while. We've been talking about the series of failed promises, the problems when it comes to cost of living, the outright lies, the promise one thing, do another thing, pay attention to what they do, not what they say. But we all know when the wheels started to fall off. It's when the Prime Minister decided that the voice must continue on. Now it's, 6-7 weeks since Australia turned around and said, hell no, but for months before that, we all know what was going to happen. 60-40, yes, turned into 60-40 no. Prime Minister had an opportunity to change the question, never did, because his expectation was that this was, apart from something he believed in, it was going to be a wedge for the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party would find itself with just a third of its flank being on the no campaign, well, it ended up being where the majority of Australians, of course, ended up being. And the Prime Minister has never really found his mojo since. In the weeks after, he's struggled to come up with what the agenda was, because the assumption was, as we said to you the whole way through, part of the way that the voice was prosecuted was that it was meant to be sort of the aerial support to hide from all of the things that the government was getting wrong. But they'd be able to point to this as the giant achievement of 2023, before, like all first-term governments, going into an early election in 2024. But the reality is there's most likely not to be an election next year, but a year is a long time in politics. If they feel there's advantage in one, they'll take one. But unlike the scenario that the Liberals had when they had 90 seats and a backbench to burn, they, of course, didn't burn it for a great idea like economic reform, say, like John Howard burnt his first-term backbench of more than 90 MPs. Remember, you only need 76 to actually be the government in majority. Instead, no, it was burnt because the Liberal Party did exactly what the Labor Party did, and that was to make somebody the Prime Minister who you didn't choose. Malcolm Turnbull's political genius meant that he burnt all of the political advantage that had been put in place after the 2013 election. The 2010 election ended up being a dead heat and a minority government because, again, the Labor Party had ruined all of its political capital that it got when it got, again, 90 seats, the same margin, at the end of John Howard's time in 2007. But Albo does not even have 80 members in the parliament, let alone 90. So here's in a scenario where if the natural gravity that goes between elections, where you lose a couple here and a couple there, he is staring down the barrel of most likely spending 2024 not trying to convince us that he should be re-elected, but trying to hold on to a majority. You see the existence of the Teals, the Greens, a media that's desperate to back in the Prime Minister means it is always very difficult for any government to be a one-term government. Now, I'm sceptical about whether this is a government that is a one-term government. I think more likely it is to be a minority government, and quite a sizably and quite a significantly government in minority. In fact, if the news poll that showed us 50-50 between the Labor Party and the Liberal Party is correct, the Liberal Party, well, it moves into the low 60s, still way too far away from being able to form power. But the Labor Party, well, it falls into the early 70s, which means it needs the Greens or the Teals or some of the other independents, but it won't be able to get there on its own. So as we know, the assumption is of this government that they are able to hold on to power, or at least hold on to a chance of having a very slim minority parliament that they have to deal with in the next term, where, of course, as Julia Gillard can tell them, you get pushed into doing plenty of things you don't want to do. We know that the Prime Minister, immediately following the voice, decided to leak the information to the newspapers that he was starting up a new campaign. And it was a specific campaign about making Peter Dutton unelectable to the Australian people. The suggestion was that they could make as much scare or fire up as much dirt as possible, you know, all the dirt that the lefty media hasn't already found, all the dirt that the ghost hasn't been able to deploy to this point as he works his way down the list of MPs who voted against him in 2018. Now, the reality is that, as I told you on this night, straight after The Voice, the best part of, 6, 7 weeks ago, that the whole plan would be get Dutton. And it has been just that. The entire focus of the Labor Party has been trying to put the focus on the opposition, but this is now backfiring, and you will be quite surprised who is noticing it. As you know, get Dutton is the only strategy they have.
That says everything about your incapacity to take responsibility for anything. It was supposed to be nice,
leader
Peter,
of the Nationals,
but he can't survive to 2:05. There is no issue too big for him to show how small he is. What we have seen from this bloke here is consistent with his entire political career has been based upon division. You struggle to find the chamber, mate. It's got to be happier, Mr. Speaker.
the Prime Minister will return to the question.
Smile a bit more. Remember when he ran for the leadership and he was going to smile some more.
Now, the reality is that this is all inside baseball, but it is all about the message that's being sent to the troops, who then have to go out and argue the case of an underperforming government in the media. Now, Labor is, if nothing else, very loyal to its message. Remember the absurdity when we had, because Julia Gillard said no to same-sex marriage, Penny Wong had to pretend that she was against same-sex marriage, but of course, when all of that was brought about via the plebiscite that Peter Dutton helped make happen, she, of course, was front and centre as one of the MPs most excited for the change. You see, in Labor, if they tell you to march this way, that way, you do, regardless of whether or not you think they should be marching in that direction or completely the opposite one. Message discipline. That's why they don't cross the floor. If they do cross the floor, they get expelled. If nothing else, that's good for getting your message across, but when the message is the bad message, well, nobody is pushing back in the other direction. And believe it or not, even the people over at the Channel 9 newspapers are noticing that Get Dutton is not as successful as they thought it was. You see, it's exactly the same trick that was put up against Tony Abbott, but it didn't work. The assumption that, if we make him sort of as scary as possible and say words like extreme over and over again, eventually it'll catch on. As I've said many times before, and I say this because it's just the way it is, this is because they're trying to replicate what Joe Biden has to this point been quite successful at doing, which is to cover up all of his failures by pointing at his political opponent. Well, I repeat, Sydney Morning Herald, The Age, today, Albanese's strategy of targeting Dutton is backfiring, and not just a little, badly, which is why the alternative Prime Minister ends the year in a much better position than he was 12 months ago. Now, again, there is no poll right now saying that he is the preferred Prime Minister, but his side is now at 50-50. The likelihood of the government being able to fight its way out of the paper bag it's put itself into, we'll all have to wait and see together. But with 50% of the country saying that Aussies feel financially worse off under Labor, it doesn't matter what the spin doctors or the policy advisors or the media mates do. The reality is that more than half of the country is financially worse off than before this government came to power. Something that polling groups have been noticing, including, as we showed you last week, this conversation with the group who is a largely lefty-leaning polling group, in a conversation with our mate Laura Jays last Monday. There'll be another one tomorrow.
The problem is that they're not ticking the competency box, and it's this lack of action that they're seeing. So people are becoming quite disenchanted, quite frustrated. It's now becoming sort of an entrenched characteristic of the Prime Minister that maybe he doesn't have what's required to lead us through this really complex economic environment. People recognise it's complex economic environment. So, sort of in the same way, leading into 2022 election, we talked about how that sort of lack of empathy, the other side of the equation on Morrison had become entrenched as a characteristic of his. This competency thing is really at risk now of becoming an entrenched characteristic of Anthony Albanese and this government. If they don't come out the other side of Christmas swinging pretty hard on the economy, on cost of living, on job security, that's starting to worry people now as this economic crisis sort of bites, on housing, then I think, if by mid next year we're still having this conversation, I think it's all over.
Fascinating stuff to watch. Now, again, he doesn't want to say that. He is somebody who, in part, that company's been giving advice to the Teals. But he's saying that they are running out of road. So the 5 fire alarm that is going off inside those who want this government to stick around is going off right now. And the reality is that with every year and more technology and more media and more commentary, the capacity of the Australian people to move on is pretty quick. And the bloke who was the solution to all the problems a couple of years ago becomes the problem a couple of years later. As you will have heard today, the same organisation sat around and gave an insight to James Campbell in the Telegraph, the Herald Sun and the Courier Mail into exactly what people's position was when it comes to this Prime Minister. In fact, some of the people who have given the advice to Redbridge that you saw just then says, among other things, and this was done in the seats of Griffith and Ryan, done in Stewart and Boothby, so we're talking about Liberal, Labor and even Green seats, quote, he hasn't really addressed cost of living. I get that there's global factors at play, but I don't think he's done much to concentrate action, much concrete action on it. Well, that would be, again, what we've talked about for months, things like the being able to cut petrol prices. Now, does it fix everything? No. Does it show the government gets it? Yes. Another said, he doesn't come across as strong. He comes across like he wants to be liked, but without making strong. The most devastating verdict came from a Queensland voter who said he's not a leader, he's a follower, he's a beta male. Now, I would suggest anyone using terms like beta male as opposed to alpha male, being a strong male, probably wasn't in the pocket of the Prime Minister, but still it's somebody in a name that, as Corey Bernardi said, is probably going to catch on, just like Airbus Albo, despite the fact they're trying to gaslight us that, oh no, well, compared to the past 6 different Prime Ministers, oh, hang on, don't count that one, and don't count that one, and only half count that one, he's so much better than everyone. But here's the bit that matters. The consistent complaint across the groups was that the federal government has not done enough to tackle cost of living. I just don't see the action on cost of living pressures. He's missing an action, and now he's running off overseas again, one voter said. Well, another complained that the belt is getting tighter, but there is no action. Now, the great hand-wringing amongst many people in the professional press is, well, kind of part of what they do for a living. But then there are those that have not been the sharpest critics of Anthony Albanese, unlike myself, from, yes, even before day one, was it minus 1,000, minus 500, minus 25 days to go? Paul Kelly, writing in the Australian newspaper over the weekend, well, he says middle-class financial woes build into an electoral tidal wave. That's the reality. Well, the Prime Minister has turned around and said, oh, we've done something for the people at the very bottom of things, but even then, it's only if kids are in childcare. Majority of people don't have kids in childcare. Oh, it's for cheaper medicines. OK, but the vast majority of people don't get affected by that because, of course, they're not pensioners. Meantime, Peter Harcher, writing again in the Sydney Morning Herald, says about some internal conversations that are happening inside the Labor Party. And we all know he'd be more clued into that now that the ghost is no longer around to tell him what's happening inside the Liberal Party or Julie Bishop. Voters aren't hearing us. The tough advice from the Prime Minister's inner circle. But the reality is that this Prime Minister, like all Prime Ministers who win an election, think that they have some sort of magic connection to the Australian people. I got it oh so right once, so I will get it oh so right next time. But the reality is, as 2019's special connection with the Australian people became a problem in 2022, exactly the same as the 2022 election may well be the case for the 2024 or 2025 election. Elections are just but a moment in time. And people are very harsh judges on people who promise to fix something and then don't actually fix it. Now, they'll turn around and say they have a fix for it, but they don't fix it. It's a little bit like when you go to the mechanic and they swear they've done something about that noise that you keep hearing in the engine, but the noise is still there in the engine. The people who say, oh, we absolutely fixed the sunroof, but the sunroof still doesn't always open or close. And the experience for most Australians is that things are not better. In fact, they are demonstrably worse. So while the Labor Party thinks that they're able to throw dark and dirty mud at Peter Dutton because they think in the end we'll be able to make a whole bunch of ads with ooga booga music and black and white and cuts and all the other usual things that they pick up off the floor around Peter Dutton, they can get away with saying things like this.
On Monday, Speaker, we saw the opposition, led by the Leader of the Opposition, come into the chamber and vote to protect pedophiles over children. That's what they did.
But even then, this becomes a problem. And while attack is a good form of defence for many politicians, it's this group of politicians that have spent the best part of the past 18 months telling us that there will no longer be attack. And if it is attack, it will all be within the realms of reasonability, to invent a word. But of course, the reality is that when you are accusing your political opponent of being pro-pedophile, I can't think of anything that's worse. But these are the same people who pretended that their political opponents didn't care about sexual assault, the same people who didn't care about people losing their homes in bushfires. Now, of course, the facts were well and truly the opposite of that. But the incentive structure that has been established in and around this government is that as long as you can make the conversation about how bad the Liberals are, then you'll be able to get away with how bad things are under your watch. But it isn't working. Again, in part because they promised something different.
Integrity and accountability in politics. Be kinder and gentler. I think we can all be kinder to each other, frankly, both within the parliament, within our own parties and across the aisle.
And when asked about this obvious contradiction, well, of course, those that toe the line, just like Penny Wong had to toe the line about same-sex marriage, are the ones now towing the line saying that the kinder, gentler parliament includes calling our political opponents people that are pro-pedophile.
I think that people like Claire O'Neill and Annika Wells are some of our strongest performers. They're very capable, competent ministers. Politics is a rough and tumble game, and people have got to be accountable for how they vote. And the truth is that Peter Dutton and the opposition voted against laws that we introduced that sought, for instance, to stop convicted pedophiles from being near school grounds. You've got to be accountable for how you vote. And as I say, the language that has been used to describe those actions is no different from what Peter Dutton himself has used. I mean, is Peter Dutton about to appoint himself as the chief censor of Australia and say what language can and can't be used and then go and disobey those rules? That's what seems to be happening here, I think.
And then again, those of us that actually pay attention. Do you know who's planning to appoint themselves as the chief censor about what can and can't be said on the internet? That bloke. This Prime Minister. Every minister. Remember, they are trying to introduce legislation that will produce massive fines for social media companies who do not delete the posts that the government declares to be misinformation. You know, like all that stuff Australians actually agreed with before they voted in a referendum. That, of course, became a major part of the ongoing political problem of this government. But as always, the Greens are there to bail the Labor Party out, and they are, with the help of the Labor Party this week, going to announce a brand new inquiry, but not one that is as effective as Jane Hume's is into things like cost of living. No, this one's going to be about the supermarkets, because they're the real bad guys. You know, they're the ones that are responsible for your electricity going up by 10 to 20%. They're the ones that are responsible for your petrol going up between 10 and 20%. Oh, that's right. It'll just be just like the bank bashing or the Qantas bashing, just another excuse for people to turn around and say, oh, evil corporations, which happen to, of course, be listed on the stock exchange. Our superannuation means we end up having to buy shares and they have to produce a bigger profit each and every year. That's the reality of those two businesses. Now, do they deserve a little bit of a heave-ho here and there? Sure. But look for a bunch of politicians to change the subject that this is what's going to fix cost of living, when some of the things that actually drive cost of living are things like insurance, not connected to the big two. Petrol, not connected to the big two. And electricity, which only gets worse because of the policies of this government, trying to transition from an electricity network that works to the one that makes them feel better when they go to international conferences. Meantime, there's just a little bit of fun that I have to have here, with some fan fiction coming out of the press gallery. It was written by the award-winning, legendary member of the press gallery, Michelle Grattan. She's worked for all of them, and now she's writing for The Conversation, appearing constantly on Radio National. She is the lady they often turn to for what's happening in politics. She wrote an article that was a fan fiction about not just what would a prime ministership of Peter Dutton be like, but she's already starting to pull apart the bad things about the prime ministership that doesn't exist yet. And according to the people who believe this government just need to say, how bad is Peter Dutton, a prime ministership that will never be around. But still, let's all read together the fan fiction of the Canberra Press Gallery attacking the Prime Minister, not who is the Prime Minister, but the person who wants to be the Prime Minister, and obviously has to go through several elections to be able to get anywhere near it. As Health Minister, his performance was ordinary. For him, the ministerial green grass was anything to do with national security. On security matters, Dutton as Prime Minister would lean in strongly at home and abroad. But would it work out in practice? If he inherited the present improved relationship with China, would he maintain or would he jeopardise it? You know, so if you suck up to China, it's a better relationship. If you stand up to China, or at least hold them to the same account as everyone else, big X against this, not Prime Minister. Prime Minister. We continue. Would his very arrival in office prejudice it? He certainly would never give China the benefit of the doubt. How would he deal with a Trump presidency or a Biden presidency? Well, it'd be exactly the same as any other Australian Prime Minister, which is whatever the American president wants, they generally get. Be it Trump, be it Biden, or be it all in between. That brings us to a potential Dutton cabinet. Though public attention is primarily on the leader, the quality of the government is determined to a significant extent by how good the frontbenchers are. The Hawke government had an exceptional cabinet. Albanese has a mixed bunch. Oh, that's the closest you get to criticism of them. And some of them have recently set Labor back. Oh, is that an actual downside of the greatest government of all time? Dutton's team is second-rate in opposition, which is not a good sign for government. So already the Prime Minister has put us back. The Prime Minister Dutton has set China relations back. And his ministers, who aren't ministers yet, have already stuffed things up. Dutton has neither the scope nor the personality to appeal to the country as an inspirational leader. This is before he's even become the Prime Minister, despite the fact that he was the one who, where 60% of Australians agreed on a national question, where the current Prime Minister was on the 40% side. But he wouldn't be an inspirational leader, no. Back to cost of living and plenty more data that we get each and every day. Remember, it's not just about feel opinions here. It's not just about happy chat. We try to show you the receipts. We try to tell you what's happening in our own country all day, every day. Let's talk about mortgages. As you know, somebody on a $500,000 mortgage has had to find an extra $13,500 since this mob came to power. An extra $21,000 for anyone on a $750,000 loan and about $30,000 for anyone over $1 million. And by the way, when we start talking about people who are more than about $1 million in hock to their financial institution, we're talking about, and this is just in the 1 million to 1,100,000 band, not above it and not below it, just in that band. We're talking about people who live in suburban parts of Australia. Now, some of these places are a little exier than others, but it's nowhere near the absolute top or the absolute bottom, but the number of places with more than $1 million in mortgage debt. People have had to find an extra $30,000 since Albo became the Prime Minister to pay off their house. In New South Wales, it's Kingsgrove, Haberfield, all the places around Collaroy, Drummoyne, Elanora Heights, Frenchs Forest, Ingleside, Narrabeen, North Narrabeen, and Wheeler Heights. In Western Australia, you can see there it's places like East Fremantle, Subiaco, Applecross North and a whole lot more. And remember, this is just in that band of 1 million to 1,100,000. Vast amount of majority are beneath that, but these are the people who have to find an extra $30,000. Do you think these people might be changing the way they're planning to vote and they don't particularly care about the Get Dutton stuff? What about in Victoria? Auburn, Hawthorn, Caulfield, Central Park, Darling South, Malvern and Warrell-Tree. Now, again, nobody's pretending that any of those places are places where people have got the backside hanging out of their trousers, but it is an idea. These are the places that have to spend an extra $30,000 a year. What a surprise that some of them are starting to say to pollsters, I'm not very keen on the government that has overseen the elbow dozen of interest rate rises and isn't doing anything about cost of living, which of course will feed into further interest rate rises. Fingers crossed there won't be any of them this week. In fact, the expectation is after the monthly inflation data and the little downtick in sales going into the November month, there'll be nothing on this until maybe February, fingers crossed. Meantime, a couple of things of crazy that I need to talk about, including what took place in Ballarat this weekend. This is disgraceful, it is not on, it is not acceptable. And what will be fascinating to see is how the Home Affairs Minister, clueless Claire O'Neill, will come out and tell us how this is disgraceful, not on, not acceptable. How she will tell us that the ASIO are going after, as they should, the neo-Nazis, marching around in an absolute disgraceful fashion up the main drag of Ballarat. Disgusting. I repeat, disgusting. Every person involved in this, you enjoy what's coming your way from the Australian law enforcement people. But interestingly, keep an eye on the outrage that comes from the Home Affairs Minister, clueless Claire O'Neill, about these people, and rightly so, but the same lack of outrage that came towards the hate preachers in Western Sydney, who, of course, were literally talking about killing the Jews. Meantime, let's talk to the United States. Have a look at the United States. This absurdity. There was a mock trial that was held over a university there called Cornell. It's one of the fancy pants ones. And they decided to go after the president of the university. Why? Because she donates money to Israeli causes, and Israeli causes equals the suffering of the Palestinian people. So these idiots decided that as a way of setting up for the peace-loving citizens of Palestine, not Hamas supporters, they should pretend to have a mock trial, a sentencing, and while not a mock execution, the removal of the boss of their university, because that'll teach everyone, won't it? Idiots. Got some data out of the ABS towards the end of last week that I wanted to pass on to you, which is that more Australians are getting married. Not more than ever before, but well and truly more than during the pandemic and even before it. In fact, in 2018, 119,000 people got married. Following year, 113,000 people got married. During the pandemic, we got down to about 80,000, then 90,000, but then last year, straight back up, 127,000. The greatest number of people getting married in about 5 years. Good to see. The number of same-sex marriages ever so slightly down on the couple of years before, but again, people getting married. But on this stat here, what is the day that most people get married? Yes, it is the 22nd of October. So not the October long weekend, but towards the end of October, which is where the majority of people, or the single largest group of people, about 2,200 people, decided to get married. What is it magical about October the 22nd? If that is your day to remember, well, good on you, because there's plenty of other people around you who have to remember exactly the same thing. Hey, and finally, a shout-out to the Brisbane Lions. They have won the AFLW competition. It is the second time they have done so. I don't know why this wasn't played at Marvel Stadium. I know that obviously we're turning towards cricket at the moment on the MCG, but being played at the old Carlton ground, Icon Park, that was sold out quickly. They could have sold out again. North was doing well in the grand final, but then the girls from Brisbane, they secured their second AFLW title. Congratulations to them, bringing the silverware back that, of course, the blokes did not in the grand. Good on you, ladies. Quick break. Back with more. We've got debate for the rest of tonight's show. Looking forward to this. Some bold predictions about the week ahead. Am I right about where Albo is going wrong and where the tack will change, where we'll be in 12 months' time? Security cameras, all the rest of it. Lots to talk about. Paul Murray Live, Sunday night. Glad you're here. How good's this for the rest of the show? All debate. Let's get to it right now. Tanya Mahalia, of course, is the leader of One Nation in New South Wales. She's in the Man Cave and the Man Cave in Melbourne. The Tower of Talk is none other than, of course, the wonderful Stephen Conroy and the equally delightful Michael Kroger. Lads, hello. Let's have a chat here.
Leo, mate. Good evening.
So, Stephen, I'm going to work up to you tonight because I think, you're here to help, and I'm sure that there's only a whole series of things to help after what I laid out in the past few minutes. But, Michael, we are seeing, of course, the pattern that any politician in power hates, which is a different version of the same story every few days, which is having a look at the frustration people have with your failures. Now, Redbridge, very interestingly, and again, to me, centre-left polling start to say that, they think that there should be action on cost of living this side of Christmas, because if they wait to the other side of Christmas to actually change some of the fundamentals of how the government's working, then it might be too late. Now, I think that, again, when you've got the media on side, when you've got people that are deeply invested in you staying in power, then I think that the task is always easier for the Labor Party to change the subject than it is for the Libs. But what do you think?
Yeah. Well, mate, what's been very clear in the last few months is that Albanese is the easy rider. He's an easy rider Prime Minister. He's good when times are good. He's good when decisions are easy, which is why the coalition is saying he's a weak leader. He supports an increase in wages for the low paid. he supports increases wages for aged care workers. And we're not objecting to that, but examples of easy decisions. He supports increases in wages for other workers, more benefits from the childcare sector, etc., etc. Now there's an inquiry into the supermarket pricing. Well, he's in favour of that. IR changes in the Senate. Oh, he's in favour of that. So where he's spending other people's money, he's very, he's very supportive of all those things. But on the other side of the line, and Prime Ministers have to deal with very hard issues, not just the easy ones. On the hard issues, this bloke is not up to the job. Hopeless on the Voice, right? The hardest thing he's had to do is sell the Voice, disaster. And where are we on the Makarrata Commission, truth-telling and treaty? No one's got any idea where he's gone to on that. On Gaza, where is he really? For a man that was photographed, happy to be photographed with Jeremy Corbyn, where is he really? What does he really believe about Israel? And on policy decisions, he leaves it to the ministers. So the infrastructure spending cuts, that's Catherine King. The NDIS blowout, that's Bill Shorten. For obvious reasons, it's always Bill Shorten's fault. He's always making, now on this disaster that Claire O'Neill and the immigration minister are responsible for, he's nowhere to be seen. It's them. He lets Claire O'Neill overreach. He walks away from her. He won't repeat her words. They're her words, not his. This bloke is great when things are easy. When things are tough, he's nowhere to be seen, which is why, mate, there will be cost of living relief coming very, very soon because he loves spending other people's money because they're easy decisions for a government to make.
Yeah, again, Stephen, I'll work up to you here, but Tanya, again, you've got plenty of Labor blood, now One Nation, but why is this Prime Minister wobbling in your view?
Look, I think he never really understood why he wanted to be Prime Minister, for one, OK? My time in the Labor Party, I always found that he was always a bit, it's a good description, beta male. I think he was always like that. And I don't think he really has any vision or any idea of what he wants to do in Australia. He kind of assumed that the Voice would happen. He doesn't really understand economics. He's had 12 interest rates hikes in his time, and he doesn't want to talk about it, doesn't want to address it. And I think, but what he is very good at is politics and manoeuvring. And I think he'll be thinking long and hard now over the holiday period what he needs to do. And you're seeing these attacks now on Dutton, and that's what Albo's about. He's about playing, the man, not the ball. And you're going to see a lot more personal attacks.
Well, and again, we saw where they went last week. But OK, Stephen, again, I think one-term chat is, I'm not there, right? I'm just not there, and you know how aggressive I am in marking this bloke since even before he became the Prime Minister, right? But let's be honest, the reality of a minority government is that he doesn't have the backbench to burn that Turnbull did, and he doesn't have the backbench to burn that Gillard did, and he doesn't have the backbench to burn that Howard did. He's in a tighter position here. Looking at the amount of runway, are you on the Redbridge side of things, the Michael side of things, sooner rather than later? Or is the reality that when you are the Labor Party, when you are a first-term government, and whatever skills the Prime Minister has, is it as urgent as that, or is this just the turn from awesome to normal?
Well, I think it falls into that last category you just said. It was a very long and happy honeymoon, but the real world has encroached. The Reserve Bank has been moronically aggressive in its increasing interest rates, and that has caused a lot of pain. And I thought you described that very well earlier, the sort of extra money every mortgagee has to provide. So I think that has fundamentally changed the political discourse. I think that the National Secretary gave a very good speech to the National Executive on Friday, which has been well reported. I think there's wise words there, and I think that it's incumbent on the National Executive and the senior leadership of the party to have a good hard look over the Christmas break. I mean, the one thing I'd say is I've spoken to a few of the colleagues in the last few days, and as is always the case, and I remember it well, whether you're in government or opposition, it's, thank God it's Christmas, it's the last sitting week. It may go a little bit longer depending on whether or not they're able to pass the legislation to deal with the High Court decision. But I think all of the Cabinet, all of the national executive and senior leadership in the party should reflect on Paul Ericsson's words. I think they're wise, calm words. I think they're, in terms of the runway as you described it, Paul, I think we're probably 18 months, so we're about halfway through the term. Those who may have thought, he's going to rush to an election in the second half of next year probably would certainly have poured cold water on that. So I think the Christmas break will be a good chance for a reset, which will get the government focused. I mean, I think the most important thing that Paul said to the National Executive was, people aren't hearing our message. People, we can think we've got a great message, but people aren't hearing it. So, I mean, I think the fact that the Greens have led the charge to get an inquiry into Coles and Woolies and their price gouging and their, record profits that they've got, and I was a little, I was frankly shocked at your attitude towards the inquiry. I think it's actually deserved, due. But the government have allowed the Greens to take the lead on it. I mean, what Dutton's doing well, and they showed that in Optus, is that they are going hard after corporate misbehaviour. And so the Albanese government looks like it's sort of a bit indifferent. And the sort of companies like Coles and Woolies that are inflicting the pain, and the government is sort of silent on it. So I think they're just off the pace right now. But I'm sure after Christmas through the new year, they'll start to pull it together.
Yeah, but I'll tell you why I have my issues around the inquiry that's suggested by, among others, Sarah Hanson-Young, all right? The Greens literally don't know the difference between turnover and profit. Remember, they want to introduce taxes on turnover, not profit, and anyone even in the smallest of businesses knows that's not quite how it works. And remember, there's already a cost of living inquiry that's there with Jane Hume. If members of that committee wanted to turn around and get the CEOs in, then OK, everyone's going to get their moment to point at the Coles CEO and scream about why is this and why. That's fine. But in my view, the fact that it's coming up now and it's coming up as part of the topic change conversation, Michael, is that either that inquiry starts as soon as possible, these people are brought before that inquiry, either by the end of the week or before Christmas, means it's an opportunity, where that'll be the 6 p.m. news that day. That's my point on that. Look, again, Stephen, I don't want to let them off the hook for some of the stuff they do, no question about it. But there's already a mechanism for it. To me, it's the Greens helping Albo change the subject.
Yeah, of course it is, mate. Unless Stephen or anyone else out there is alleging there's a cartel between Woolies and Coles, and I don't know if there's any evidence of that, they're in competition with each other. But presumably the Greens and Labor have got evidence of cartel behaviour, which is why we're having this inquiry. Alternatively, we could be having this inquiry because, again, it's another really easy decision for Albo. Oh, great, an inquiry into supermarket prices. That'll be popular. I mean, if you did a poll of 100 people outside Coles or Woolies and said, do you think there should be an inquiry into supermarket prices? They're so high, you'd get 100 out of 100 saying, absolutely. Just made the same as if you said, do you think you deserve a tax cut? Absolutely. So it's a very easy decision for Albo to go along with. It's another one of these things. When it's electorally popular, easy, it's other people's money, etc., he's happy to go along with it. It's electorally popular to do. He'll be there.
But also, in Tanya, again, what comes out of the inquiry, as generally could be the case, is if there's a flaw in the law, then there's a suggestion to change it. I'm not entirely sure what that flaw may be. Again, if Sarah Hanson-Young knows more than we do, unlikely, but still, we will all find out together. But again, your communities in Western Sydney, right? Now, obviously, government can't pay for everything. They can't fix every problem here. What are the sorts of things that they want out of a federal government? What do you think would count as help?
Well, I think the first thing most people will be thinking about is it's nice of the Greens to suggest this inquiry, but they were happy to spend almost $500 million on the Voice referendum. Yeah, they were happy to see all these interest rate hikes. And let's go to the source of where the costs are coming from, and it's energy prices are going up. Correct. Where's the inquiry in that?
Transportation
Where's the inquiry
costs?
Into transportation?
Yeah. This government's introduced a tax on heavy vehicle movement. Yeah.
So, don't just start with one part, get to the beginning, OK? Let's get to energy prices. And we've just had net zero targets, arbitrary net zero targets passed in New South Wales. Actually, I think the most toughest in Australia. Correct. 70% by 2035. Pretty tough targets. And you've got a government that's just trying to... look, to me, I think this is just a distraction, OK? And I think Alba's very good at this. And you're right, you'll have an inquiry, bring in the CEOs, throw some, throw the books at them, but will it change anything? No, it won't. It won't change the issue of cost of living because we're not dealing with a core issue, and that's the high energy prices.
All right, hard heads, not heavy hearts. Should Josh Frydenberg run for Kooyong? We'll discuss it straight after the break. Thank you so much for watching. We're here with Tanya Mahalia, the leader of One Nation in New South Wales, none other than the wonderful Michael Kroger and the equally wonderful Stephen Conroy. See, when you're both sitting next to each other, I can't kind of pick one over the other. So you're both going to get the cuddle from a far way away. All right.
You're just saying that about Stephen. We know that.
We all know he's here to help. I mean, we know how good the government's going. He's sitting back in Melbourne. If he was really in there, he'd be in Canberra.
He'd be up there. Yeah, he'd be out in Canberra.
He'd be measuring the lodge for a special wedding tent. He'd be working it all out about how to turn it all around. All right. Now, let's have a chat here. Josh Frydenberg has said that, no, not going to go around again, recontest the seat that he lost to Monique Ryan, has got a spectacular job with Goldman Sachs. He is very, very, very disturbed by the rise of anti-Semitism, and he would clearly like to be back on the front lines of Australian politics. It is clearly more profitable to his life not to be at the moment. And the question is the hard question is that even if Josh Frydenberg returns, the Get Dutton play, which you've got to imagine if it's going to play anywhere, is going to play okay in Victoria compared to the rest of the country, does he put his hand up? Now, Stephen, again, we will all agree, should federal politics have Josh Frydenberg in it? You betcha. You betcha. Find a way, get him in there. But again, the particulars of the election of 24 and 25 is that if there's one place in Australia Get Dutton is going to work, it is going to be Victoria. And while obviously there might be people who've said they don't like Monique Ryan, apart from that whole business of her wanting to be the Prime Minister or thinking she'll be the Prime Minister one day, I don't see a lot of stories about how locals get screwed over. I mean, one of the Teals in Sydney deserves probably to get the punt because she only just started working weekends. But what do you think? And again, I say it head over heart, he probably shouldn't do it this time.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think Josh will be a very important contributor, particularly in the current climate with the Middle East conflict. I think Josh's wisdom and clarity would serve the country well. But Josh he's on the horns of a terrible dilemma. Does he help Peter Dutton almost become Prime Minister and ensure that Peter Dutton gets to stay for 3 more years? And let's pretend Peter Dutton wins the Prime Ministership 3 years' time. Josh is going to be back to the future. He'd probably be Treasurer in a 3 or 6 year Peter Dutton government. And he's done that before. I mean, Josh is only coming back if he thinks he can be Prime Minister one day. But him successfully winning a seat at the next election helps Peter Dutton closer to being the Prime Minister and moves Josh further away. So it's a terrible dilemma. I mean, as I said, I think Josh would make an invaluable contribution right now with his ability to cut through and prosecute the case around the Middle East. But I suspect in the end, for all the flattery, and I know it's, John Howard's been to see him and, people are commissioning polling and Michael's been whispering him in his ear and give him a ring, Josh, mate, we need you, come on back. Come on, tell the truth, Michael.
One for us.
But I think in the end, if he's wants to focus on his family, and what's best for him, I suspect he'll decline the opportunity.
Well, again, I think that the Teals at some point there's a flush coming, but that most likely is going to be in a dramatic change of government, where you're moving back towards the mid 80s and the 90s, as there were the changes of 2007 and 2013. Michael, again, we all know what we want, which is Josh Frydenberg in the Parliament, but should he do it?
Well, I love Josh.
Here we go.
He's a very good friend of mine.
Roll the tapes, everyone. Roll the tapes, everyone. Here we go.
I think the Parliament's much poorer for not having him there. Well, here's the hard-headed answer to that. The people in Kooyong, who I'm sure have got regret now, put him out of Parliament. And he's got a fantastic job, beautiful wife and family, and he's devoted himself to that, and that's where I think he'll stay in the immediate future. He's made a commitment to Goldman Sachs. Do I think Josh would win? I think he probably would win against Monique Ryan, who the people of Kooyong have got to realise now this has been a complete waste of time. We had the Treasurer who could influence the country. Now we've got a member who can't influence anything. So they made a terrible mistake in swapping Frydenberg for Ryan. So I don't expect him to run this time. I discount, by the way, what Stephen said. Josh, of course he'd like to be Prime Minister. There's 151 members of the House of Reps.
Monique Ryan wants to be Prime Minister.
You know what? I'll tell you a secret. They all want to be Prime Minister. So, of course he'd like to be, but would he happy to be Treasurer in a Liberal government if he can't be Prime Minister? Yeah, it's better than not being Treasurer. But the real politic is, and this is not part of Josh's thinking, by the way, but it's the way I look at things. He couldn't afford to run and lose again.
Yes. Yes.
So I think if he lost, right? So if you lose in 22 and then you lose again in March 25,
then game over.
You just lose a bit of gloss. The game sort of, Australia's a cruel place. There's plenty of people who've lost seats and come back again. I mean, famously Howard lost, Kennett lost twice, etc., 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 Greiner lost, etc. But it would take, he'd probably think then, well, look, I've given it, because Josh is all or nothing. He'd work on this for a whole year, mate. If he was the candidate, he'd be full-time for a year. He'd leave Goldman, he'd be there for a year. So, he'd probably think to himself, I've given it 2 goes, they voted against me again, I've got the message, they don't want me, they want Monique Ryan. Now, as I said, I think Frydenberg would win Kooyong this time, but he'll certainly win it in 28. Because by then the people of Kooyong, the good people of Kooyong, as in other Teal seats, will have realised this has been a complete waste of time having these independents with no influence whatsoever representing us.
And he'll have plenty of cash, and when he's got the plenty of cash, it makes you even more fearless when you know there's a little bit of a buffer there. All right, I've got a minute here, so give me a bold prediction
of course.
for the week ahead. Tanya, what's absolutely guaranteed, definitely happening in the next 7 days? What's your bold prediction for the next 7 days?
Well, I think that Albo will be filling his diary with a lot of visits to his caucus.
Yes,
okay? I think that's what he's going to be focused on, and that's catching up with a lot of his members of the caucus.
Yeah, interesting.
Because he's rattled. I think they're rattled.
See, she knows how Labor works.
Yes, I know exactly how Labor works.
Yeah, it's like, you randomly, hello, Prime Minister, you want to be seen in the electorate? Okay, let's go for a walk. Stephen, what's definitely happening?
Look, I think despite some of the colour and movement you're seeing, Bill Shorten will successfully reform the NDIS. He will eventually bring the states on board. And I think that he will be able to significantly improve the government's budget bottom line by some significant reforms that he's starting to work through the Parliament over certainly the discussions are now, but with what's coming, I think Bill will have a big win.
He's just here to help. That's the thing. He's just here to help. All right, that's it for now. We appreciate it.
Now you've really worried Albo, Steve.
Yeah, thank you. See, now he's definitely picking up the phone. Michael, I'm running out of time, so we'll save it for next week. Thank you, guys. Do appreciate it. All right, quick break. Back with more. Now, as you know, Our Town next week, Port Lincoln, but something we're going to do before every Our Town is try and take care of the little bubbers in those hospitals. We were so successful in Mildura. We're going to do it again in Port Lincoln. More in a sec. Now, as you know, last time when we did Our Town, we raised more than like $100,000. Unbelievable amount of money for Humpty Dumpty. This is the great charity that takes care of kids who ended up having their first few days or first few months needing special intensive care treatment. Amazingly, we have to donate money. So our plan around Our Town for the next year is to do one of these every month. Now, I don't expect to raise $100,000 every month. So we're going to pick a number and set that number. So as soon as we get to the number that I say, donations close and we've done what we need to do. So help me out. With $47,480 for Port Lincoln Hospital in regional South Australia. Okay? Right now, we need a phototherapy system which deals with things like jaundice. We need breast pumps because it obviously helps mums that are having some difficulties connecting. Now, remember, Port Lincoln is hours and hours and hours away from Adelaide, so there's also other technology that we're going to do that's going to connect them to services in Adelaide. But that's the number I need. And if you're looking for a present for someone for Christmas, you can donate, tax deductible, and say you've done it in their name. There are people right now standing by at Humpty Dumpty. Telephone number 1300 486 789. 1300 486 789. Let's get to 47 grand by the time we wake up tomorrow.